so much. If you haven't, or if you know of somebody who has not, send them over to Service Arizona. Dumb website name, but it's actually useful. It's actually done pretty well. Service, as in you get your car serviced, Arizona, servicearizona.com, and you can go get them or your family registered to vote. Can't stress that enough of how important that is, but thank you for doing your civic duty. We're going to have a board meeting, speaking of civic duty, right after this talk. If you'd like to join, it's open to all members or anybody who just wants to kind of swing on by. Or you can go to lunch. It's your call. You can go to a board meeting or go to lunch. Board meeting. Somebody's a glutton for punishment back there. Alrighty. So Lou, you can introduce lunch. Awesome.
Hi everybody, I'm filling in for Richard today, who's not feeling too well. So we're going to go to lunch after this to the Blue Adobe, which is very close by. It's less than a half a mile, just off of Country Club past University. So if you'd like to join us, see me after so I know who's coming and I know who to look for. Thanks.
And their chili rellenos are to die for. They're good stuff. So yeah, please do join us at Blue Adobe. I won't be there because I'll be in the board meeting as previously discussed. But it's a great way to meet people and get to know folks.
Excuse me.
She'll also be in the board meeting. Hey Anita, are you ready for us? Come on up, Anita.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Anita. As Chris mentioned, this building and this organization is supported by the members and by generous donors. As humanists, we own this building. And as you know, home ownership requires money, it requires maintenance and all that happy hoopla. And actually, since I've become so involved with this organization, I think of it as a family. And in a lot of ways, we are a family. And as a family, we like to get together once in a while and have some fun, kick up our heels, and maybe even imbibe in a little alcoholic happiness. So now comes the pitch. We will be holding our Flying Spaghetti Monster fundraiser, and I emphasize fundraiser, on Saturday, October 13th, and doors will open at 6?
We think we pushed it back to
5 p.m. Now, this is something that really disappointed me. Chris Wojno, our glorious leader here, had scheduled a meeting for last Sunday to solicit volunteers, activity leaders, and people to come up with and run entertainment ideas. My New Jersey accent kicks in. For the Spaghetti Monster dinner. Now, for this planning meeting, 5 people showed up, myself included.
I appreciate everybody that showed up. And some people couldn't make it, and I screwed up on the date, so some of that's...
Excuse me, I'm talking.
I'm sorry.
Now, this planning meeting was announced on Meetup. As I said, 5 people showed up, myself included. Thank you, Christina Hepler, Sarah Jones, and first-timer Cynthia Taibbi, for your enthusiastic willingness to volunteer and be proactive. Kathy Pettigrew, who was not able to attend that meeting, emailed us a list of suggestions and will be a willing participant at the event. Okay. As the event will come up faster than you may think, as everything always does, because Christmas is probably just around the corner too, we need people to volunteer for some of the following tasks. Arrange tables in the morning, meeting hall, and patio. Help with decorations. This would be early in the day before the event starts. Organize food preparations and help with food prep. Help set up food on the conference table. Place plates, eating utensils, and napkins on tables, on the conference table. Set up glassware on the drink table, which I think will be outside again, Chris? Okay. And at the party, we will need people to help run and collect money for a 50-50 raffle, run fundraising games for prizes, and do kitchen cleanup. At the end of the party, we'll need people to continue doing kitchen cleanup and clean up the tables and pull up the tablecloths, just general cleanup around the hall. Right now, I would like a show of hands of all the people who may be willing, I know it's a little early, but may be willing to volunteer for this fun-filled, rollicking event to help raise funds to support our unique community center. Okay, wonderful. Oh, this fills my heart with pride. Now, by the next, what was that? Was there a comment from the peanut gallery captain? By the next Sunday meeting, we will have a list of specific duties and how many people needed for each one. And I have a sign-in sheet that I'm going to pass around right now. All I will need is your name and phone number. You don't have to volunteer for any specific duty. I just want to know how many people will be willing to come and help out and make this party a rousing and profitable event. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thanks so much, Anita. Like I said, it's going to be an amazing, fun-time event, and you're going to help us make it possible. So totally looking forward to that. The kids are going to have a blast. We're giving them treasure maps, and they're going to go bury treasure, and then they're going to change them out, and they're going to have a little scavenger hunt. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be so much fun. So could use your help on that. Please do sign up, and yeah, see you then. Did want to have a quick announcement for the American Humanist Association here. The American Humanist Center for Education is pursuing the opportunity to offer Scouts, formerly the Boy Scouts of America, a chance to earn a Humanist Award as part of the Scouts Religious Emblems program. At present, non-theists are not accepted by the Scouts, but we wish to change this. They have an article in the Humanist magazine. If you get that, please do check it out. If you're curious and you want to kind of help sort of wedge our way in somehow and change things from within, come up and see me. I can put you in touch with who wants to do that. So. There's also a child crisis center around the corner. We're looking to start up a group to help work with the kids, to get them somebody to help work with them, to be their friend, to help them through some hard times. Would anybody be interested in working with the child crisis centers? Awesome. Could you come see me after this meeting real quick? I'll get you in touch with Joe. He's the one coordinating this. That's going to be amazing. We're going to set up a quick group for this, and we're going to go over there. We're going to help volunteer with them. Ron, you around here? Come on up. Come on down. Just sort of explain what the program is and what you got in your hot little hand.
Sure. So, as some of you may or may not know, we had a inmate reach out to us and inquire about more information about the humanists and who we are and what we do. We've been in contact with that individual. I've been in contact with that individual several times, and since then I've encouraged him to write an open letter to the Humanist Society encouraging more interaction, because I can write him every so often, but we need to get that more out and more regular. If you're interested, here is his letter. I brought copies. You can take it home with you if you're interested. I do plan on going out there at some point in time. I am discussing that with him, figuring out what that process looks like, all of that stuff. So I do want to start working with that population in any way that I can. And if you're interested, I have that here. Yeah, that's really it.
So this is the Humanist Inmate Program. So this is somebody who's incarcerated now and is looking for more information about non-Christian religions. Because, as they all say, if you go into the prison, you're likely to get out. If you find God, you find Jesus, right? So this is helping somebody out, kind of communicating with them on the inside about humanist values and giving them an opportunity to explore that.
Yes, absolutely.
So if anybody else would like to write letters, become part of the inmate program, where's this person incarcerated?
Douglas.
So, yeah, so right here in the state.
It is south of Tucson on the border.
Very south. So yeah, if you'd like to get involved with that, Ron would love to talk to you. Well, he'd like to talk to you anyway, because that's just the way he is. But he'd love to talk to you, and we could use more voices to kind of help inmates pick something other than just Jesus. Like woodworking or something. I don't know. Thanks, Ron. I found carpentry. Right? Keep it in the family. That works too. Bruce, don thy cap and gay apparel.
Yes.
Come regale us.
Holy headgear. Pasta man. We are planning some music for the upcoming Spaghetti Monster dinner on October the 13th, and preparing for that. We have a rehearsal today. 5 minutes after the conclusion of this meeting, we will meet in the library. Anyone who is willing to sing should join us. The requirements are, 1, that you will sing enthusiastically. Number 2, that you will attend at least one of the rehearsals, which is today after the meeting, or next time, which is April the 12th after the meeting. August. Yes, August the 12th. And the other course requirement is that you plan to come to the dinner. So if you would meet with us today, I promise to be done by 12 o'clock. It will be short and sweet, so come join us.
Thanks so much, Bruce. It's going to be a lot of fun. Just a reminder, he wrote these himself, or does Dolores have a hand in some of these? No, Bruce wrote these himself. These are fresh beats, so come and kick it with him in the library right after the meeting. Okay, I got some announcements for some future meetings. As always, our Smart Recovery meeting, everybody's welcome to attend if you've got some sort of addiction or you've got a family member struggling with addiction. They're every night on Monday at 7 p.m. I'll be here. You can say hi and get some support from your fellow humanists. We also have a newish. The group's been up for a little while, but we've had so much success with our Let's Geography that we've decided to branch out to our Let's Eat Geography group. And no, we're not eating any globes. So the idea is, once you learn about a place, it's nice to kind of experience that place via the taste buds. So this month they're doing Qatar, and they found a Qatar-ish place nearby. Qatar. They found, I've heard it either way. Depends on what news station you're looking at. So they're going to have, it's right around the corner from here. I believe it's on the 1st, so August 1st. Come on by to the place. It's all on Meetup, so check it out on their RSVP. Let them know you're coming so they get a proper head count. It's going to be a lot of fun, and show up, eat some food, meet some people, have a good time. Also on the 1st, we have our TED Talks. Any themes for our TED Talks, or to be determined?
Not this time around, but not this TED Talk, but the next TED Talk, we are going to vote on themes.
Awesome. So that means you get to do whatever you want. So bring in TED Talk videos that you find interesting, and come talk about them and explore them in greater detail.
Just make sure they're on the actual TED website,
Yeah.
not YouTube, please.
Yeah. Go to the TED website, check them out. If you've got a video you really like, you want to talk about, it's a lot of fun. Right here at the center on August 1st at 7 at night. Our next Inquiring Minds is going to be on August 4th, Saturday, August 4th, and it's going to be on prison systems and how to improve them, which we were just talking about. So if you want to help improve them, you can talk to Ron, or you can come to the Inquiring Minds and discuss what you think would be great ideas for improving the prison systems. On Friday the 10th, we have something different going on for our Humanities Project. It's going to be our distinguished professors, in air quotes, Zenaida Quintana and Jennifer White, and they're going to be hosting their Quintana White Institute of Sound Science, and they'd like you to participate in their groundbreaking study on sound scientific study of sensual cognition of mood music moods. I know, right? That's worthy of a PhD right there. So what they're going to be talking about is how music influences your mood overall. So if you'd like to come in and participate in this sort of experiment, they'd love to have you as a participant. It's going to be a lot of fun. They listen to music. Our Humanities Project's been around for a long time, so please do come to that. We've got a lot going on. Saturday, August 11th. We've got our crocheting mats for the homeless. Anita leads that because she's awesome. And we take old bags from the grocery store and knit them into sleeping mats. Crochet them into, I know, bad me. And then we give them out. Go ahead, Kathy.
Chris, I was able to take 7 mats to Tumbleweed 2 weeks ago, and I can't tell you how grateful those kids are for them. They told me, they talk about them all the time, they love them. It was very heartwarming to be able to give that many mats at one time. Usually I can only take 1 or 2, but this time we had quite a few, and I was able to take 7, and they were extremely grateful. So if any of you can come and help crochet, you'll be doing a world of good.
It's a really good cause, and we have a lot of fun. It's kind of like a crocheting circle. I don't want to say knitting circle again. But it is a lot of fun, and there's direct results right there. There was a question over here. Yeah. So yeah, that's at 10 o'clock right here on Saturday the 11th. That evening on the same Saturday the 11th, there's game night at 6:30. It's a lot of fun. Come bring your board games or just play with some friends. We've got our big party going on for Hal and Doreen Saperstein. So that's going to be on September 15th. We're going to be selling out some tickets as well. Details to come. We're going to be posting it soon, but just want to keep reminding you that it's headed our way and it's coming up quick. And finally, our Sunday speaker next time is going to be on Arizona's mining and modern mining crisis. Roger Featherstone will share with us how foreign mining companies are planning to destroy precious public lands in Arizona and how Arizona's weak laws allow this to happen. He'll focus on Oak Flat, Rosemont, and other places in danger and show how mining companies are planning this destruction. Roger will also share with us what is being done and what can be done about it. That's going to be Sunday, August 12th at 10 a.m. And again, that's also when we're going to be doing another Flying Spaghetti Monster rehearsal. For our Humanist Minute, I'd like to bring up Christina Hepler. She's been a member for quite some time. She's awesome. We have some exciting announcements.
Well, I've only been a member for a year, but I've been coming for a while. For those that don't know, Chris and I have been working to try and think of something we can do for our lovely podium, which we had refurbished, about a year and a half ago. So our logo can be well known. Lonnie, if you'll raise your hand, please. This gentleman in the yellow shirt, along with Terry Pappas. If you'll raise your hand, Terry. So, Lonnie made this to go on the lovely podium. Also, for the Flying Spaghetti Monster dinner. Not only is it important that everyone show up, not only is it important that everyone volunteer with Anita, and in fact, I just noticed that both Lonnie and Terry have volunteered and they're brand new to this organization, so we thank you for that. Lonnie also made this. This is going to be our big grand prize at the Flying Spaghetti Monster dinner. So if you show up, you buy some raffle tickets, you have a chance to take this home. On top of that, Terry and Lonnie both make beautiful jewelry. This is one of Terry's pieces. All of Lonnie's pieces are in here. You guys can come up and check it out. And if you guys are interested, you got someone with a birthday coming up, feel free to reach out to them, because I think as humanist society, it's important to support local businesses, especially local businesses that are willing to support us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you very much. It's very beautiful. So I do have one last thing. I'm sorry. I'm real sorry. Anybody familiar with Aaron Ra? Anybody ever heard of that guy? So some YouTuber fights creationists online. Well, he's going to be in town next Sunday, and if you want to get drunk, if you want to go to the thing with him, he loves his stouts. Is he going to be dressed as a Klingon?
No word yet.
No word yet on that, but it would be great. Just wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Aaron. He's probably not watching, but if he was, he'd get that. Anyway, so he's going to be at a Baptist church called Cornerstone Church here in Mesa next Sunday. He's going to be teaching creationism, well, the Darwinism and evolution to creationists. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So it's going to be fun. If you'd like to go, we're going to be posting some information about that probably later tonight. Alex is going to be handling the coordination on that. So I just wanted you to be aware, and we're going to try and go get ready with him after the event. I think he'll need it. So, yeah. And with that lovely announcement, Pam, would you please come up and introduce our speaker?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I'm excited to introduce somebody that I know most of you already know and are absolutely looking forward to. I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, "Oh, Jim's coming. This is great." I mean, I almost feel like I don't need the introduction, but I'm going to share a little bit about him anyway, because maybe some of you don't know all of this. But Jim Richardson was born in Bronx, New York in 1931. He holds a BA from Iona College and a PhD from NYU. He taught history for more than 40 years, and the last 30 of them at the University of Akron on Ohio. He and his late wife Marie moved to Arizona in 2005 to be close to 2 of their 5 children after her diagnosis of Alzheimer's. The other children live in Brooklyn, New York, Pittsburgh, and rural Washington State. Marie unfortunately died in 2014. Jim, a self-confessed secular humanist and social democrat, has devoted his old age to helping launch his grandchildren and reading them the great books with what he hopes is intelligent appreciation. So today he's going to talk to us about a gentleman by the name of John B. Rawls that I'm sure a lot of us don't know about, so I'm excited to learn and excited to hear Jim speak. So please help me welcome Jim Richardson.
John Rawls was the most important political philosopher in the United States and maybe the Western world in the 20th century. His dates are 1921 to 2002, so reasonably contemporary. He was born in Baltimore of an affluent family. His father was a successful lawyer, and he was one of 5 sons. Unfortunately, the family was marred by tragedy. 2 of his younger brothers died from infectious diseases contracted from him. Diphtheria that he survived, but the brother did not, and then whooping cough that the brother did not. His formal education was at the Kent School, prep school in Connecticut, and then at Princeton. He searched around for a major at Princeton, tried a number of different things, and finally decided on philosophy. He graduated in January of 1943, in the middle of World War II. And then it was immediately into the Army as an enlisted man. And after basic training, he was sent to the South Pacific, where he endured some of the bitterest fighting of World War II. And he was involved in something like 150 days of active combat. He once took off his steel pot to get a drink of water from a river, and a Japanese sniper's bullet creased his scalp. And he carried that for the rest of his life as a memento. His religious experience is an interesting story. He started out in a conventional religious family, church-going, but not terribly enthusiastic. Well, let's put it this way, not terribly intense about it. Went to church on Sunday as a matter of routine. In his last years at Princeton, he became intensely religious. he read the neo-Orthodox theologians. The only one that I've ever heard of is Reinhold Niebuhr, but Niebuhr was one of them, and there were others as well. His senior thesis was subsequently discovered in the Princeton Library, and Harvard University Press actually published it. So he had an undergraduate thesis written when he was 21 that is now in book form. It gives you an idea of the intensity of his religious commitment. But his experiences in World War II, the death of his best friend in the regiment, plus many other deaths, and then seeing the newsreels of the first discovery of the Nazi death camps. Those two things together made him give up his faith entirely. So from then on, he was entirely secular. I'm going to have something to say about comprehensive accounts in a little bit, but he had been through 3 comprehensive accounts by the time he was 24 years old. Conventionally religious, intensely religious, and then totally secular. After the war, he came back to Princeton. He had originally intended to become an Episcopal priest, but the loss of faith took care of that. So he came back to Princeton for a PhD in philosophy, which he received in 1949. It was also in 1949 that he married Margaret Fox, and that marriage lasted for more than 50 years and produced 4 children. It lasted until his death in 2002. And while he is in his early years of his philosophical career, his teaching career, he taught at Princeton, taught at Cornell, taught at MIT, and then finally at Harvard. In addition to Princeton, during his education, he spent a year at Oxford, where he had exposure to 2 of the great minds of the 20th century, Isaiah Berlin and Stuart Hampshire. So Rawls was a thoroughly well-schooled philosopher. Began thinking about the whole question of justice and justice as fairness. The first article he published on that theme was in 1958 with that title, Justice as Fairness. And these years, I think, are important to think about the dates in which his work was published. In his collected papers, and that's also been published, he worked on that notion of justice and fairness until finally he produced his great book, A Theory of Justice, in 1971. May I ask how many have heard of A Theory of Justice? Okay, good. It's a blockbuster. It sold more than 500,000 copies, if you can imagine that, and it's been translated into more than 30 languages. It's a very long book. It's something like 500 and plus pages. It's very carefully written. There's no humor in it. It's nothing like Bertrand Russell with his zingers, but it was still a book that people were engaged with. There was even a character on the TV series Law and Order who makes reference to A Theory of Justice. So it percolated into the popular culture, people knowing about it. Look at some of the major ideas of theory of justice. The first thing he did was to reject utilitarianism. He considered utilitarianism the basic thrust of Anglo-American moral philosophy. Utilitarianism can be roughly described as the greatest good of the greatest number, or the highest average utility, satisfaction of preferences, associated with Jeremy Bentham and later John Stuart Mill. Rawls rejected that tradition. He thought that it was too likely that some people's liberties or some people's values would be suppressed in pursuing the greater good of the greatest number. He wanted to have the highest possible dignity for the worst off people in the society. So that's why he went back to the social contract tradition. The social contract we associate with John Locke and his influence on the American Revolution, founding generation, with Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his social contract theories, and above all, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who probably had the greatest impact on Rawls of any of his previous philosophers. And Kant stressed his categorical imperative that we treat all fellow humans as ends in themselves and not simply as means for us to achieve our goals. So to treat everyone as an agent, as a separate, dignified character, and keep that in mind in our average daily life. He created a thought experiment. Now this is the social contract. He's not saying that this actually did happen. He created a thought experiment. What would happen if the people, or better, the representatives, more likely the representatives, gathered together to establish the basic principles of the society? What would they do? What would they come up with? And he thought what they would come up with in this position, this original position, the values of liberty and equality. And he set some conditions for the gathering in the original position. And the basic condition is what he calls the veil of ignorance. When we get together, we don't know our gender, our social class, our race, our level of talent, our level of education. We don't know any of that. All we know is that we are human beings and citizens. What would we come up with? And then he comes up with an idea that he calls the difference principle. We would be out to make sure that everybody gets at least enough to live a decent life. So a broad range of liberties and enough material resources to live a dignified life. So he is looking for a broad category of liberties that everyone would have in the society. There would be enough to go around so long as it was properly distributed. Was inequality permitted? Yes, under certain conditions. And the inequality could only be if the positions that carried with them greater income or greater prestige, position in the society, were open to all on the basis of fair competition and a reasonable equality of opportunity. You think about that, those are very stringent conditions to meet in order to satisfy that difference principle. The second part of that would be that the inequality would lead to a better position for the worst off. So we might encourage people to go through medical school with all the pain that might involve, in order that there would be more health care available to the least well positioned. He's thinking that we're in a condition of great uncertainty. We don't know where we're going to wind up when we get together in the original position. So we want to make sure that the worst off aren't that badly off. Even if we were to wind up in the worst off, we'd still be able to live a dignified life. So justice as fairness is focused on what the position, on fair equality of opportunity and what the position is of the worst off in the society. There's a great deal of redistributist thrust in Rawls's thing. He doesn't quite stipulate it, but when he talks about fair equality of opportunity and enough to make sure that everybody gets a chance to live a decent life, you're talking really heavy-duty redistribution period to make the worst off at least minimally dignified way of life. There would also have to be a carryover from one generation to the next. It would be unjust if the current generation used up all the resources, didn't set aside something for future generations, didn't have what he called a just savings principle. That would also be unjust. So in our zeal to make everybody at least reasonably well off, we cannot shortchange future generations in Rawls's thinking. So there's fair activity, one generation to another. And so he looks for an ability to be reciprocal, to engage each other in a fair system of cooperation, so that we come up with these just results. So theory is this blockbuster book, sold all of these copies. The bibliography on Rawls is enormous. There are thousands of items in print on people looking at theory, questioning some of its positions. Rawls took all of these criticisms seriously. He was always trying to get it right. How could he modify his theory when people brought up criticisms that he thought were valid? And there's one very big thing that Rawls thought about. Theory is totally secular. He never says that it's totally secular, but you don't have to read very far between the lines to realize that this whole thing operates as a, secular comprehensive account. But the United States is a religious society. What, 40–50% of the people, church-going, believers, what have you. So Rawls said, well, in thinking about this, we have to make accommodation to the fact that the United States is such a religious society. He remained a secularist, but he thought as long as religion and other comprehensive accounts were reasonable, it would be possible to promote justice as fairness. So people who had reasonable religious beliefs, reasonable comprehensive accounts, could come together and still create, as a self-standing, separate political philosophy of justice as fairness. So he thought that justice as fairness could be agreed upon both by the religious and by the secular, as long as everybody is reasonable about it. He distinguishes between reasonable and rational. It might be rational for somebody to monopolize resources for his own benefit. That would be rational, but it wouldn't be reasonable. So we want people to agree on the reasonable. In a way, that's a carryover of Kant between what he called the categorical imperative and the hypothetical imperative. Kant wanted people to do the right things for the right reasons, and so Rawls is ready to do the same thing. Does anybody have any questions about some of the basic theory? I'd like to save comment to go over at the end, but just to make sure that I've defined my terms here so that everybody's clear on what I'm talking about. Yes?
I'm sorry, I missed what you said about Rawls is thinking of what's reasonable.
Yeah.
And what was the other word?
Rational.
Rational.
It might be rational for somebody who was self-interested to promote self-interest at the extent or at the expense of being reasonable. In a way, you could say, be reasonable, agree with me. I mean, that's part of what a critic might say about Rawls's definition of reasonable. But, reasonable would meet his standards that would promote a good society.
I'm wondering if what he really meant was ethical rather than reasonable, because you can justify reason to your own good.
Yeah, well, I think reasonable would be that you would be ready to engage in a fair degree of cooperation in the society. What Rawls is looking at is not only our own self-interest, but how do we interact with others to create an ongoing, stable society in which promotes justice. Let me just contrast Rawls in a minute with, let's say, Ronald Reagan. In 1980, Reagan asked a question in the debate with Jimmy Carter. So those of us of a certain age might remember this. When he said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" That was Reagan's question. Rawls's question would be, are we a more just society than we were 4 years ago? Not necessarily am I better off, but are we a more just society? And that's what he meant by reasonable, that we are committed to a a society in which people can interact and have a fair degree of cooperation in order to make as many people well off as possible. Yes?
The idea of demand with reasonable and rational, when you cited Reagan, concentration of wealth doesn't lend to creating demand. So if you concentrate the wealth at the top or you create monopolies, then you stifle demand, which literally blurs the line between reasonable and rational.
Okay, this is a question of economics, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, the people who say, you know, if you feed the horses, the birds will benefit. Somehow you come down with trickle down. You know, if you throw the money into the top, it trickles down to the bottom. There's no real evidence that that happens. If we were talking about effective demand, the more widespread the ability to consume is, the more we have effective demand. So I think just from technical economics, you can make a point that a broad distribution of income and wealth is to everybody's benefit in the long run. You know, the people who want to funnel money to the top don't accept that principle, and they push trickle down instead. And I don't accept that. But that, I don't think Rawls would accept it either. Yeah, when you look at toward the end of his life, what was happening in the United States, his activity toward that was rage, because he thought we had moved. We had moved away from where we should have been. Okay, so now I'd like to spend a little time going into what was the United States like during the years that Rawls was working on theory of justice, and then what has happened subsequently. When Rawls was writing, he thought the United States was becoming a more just society. Was it fully just? By no means. He was well aware of the racial divisions, of gender roles, of class. He was well aware of that. But he thought that we were moving in a reasonable direction. So in the 40s, 50s, 60s, we were moving in a reasonable direction. We could point out a great deal that was wrong with American society during those decades. But at the same time, you know, the phrase, the rising tide lifts most boats, you could make that case in the 50s and the 60s. The differential was in the direction of less difference in income and wealth, especially on an after-tax basis. Marginal tax rates were high throughout the 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s. The United States was in much better position after World War II than its competitors. We had flattened Germany and Japan. The English had used up all of their capital in the prosecution of World War II, so the United States was virtually untouched as a generator and possessor of wealth during those decades. And the money was going more into the bottom than it was toward the top. The United States during these decades of the 50s, 60s, etc., was still what can be called the Great Compression. In 1929, we were a highly unequal society. Throughout the 1920s, income and wealth was being funneled toward the top. In the Great Depression, everybody, well, almost everybody, Joe Kennedy made money, but almost everybody else, wealth was compressed and income was compressed. And that continued throughout the post-war period. So if you look at the differentials, they're going in the direction of more going toward the bottom in the 40s, 50s, and even into the 1960s. The tide began to change in the 1970s. Some point in the 1970s, the differential went in the other direction, that more wealth now and more income now is being directed toward the upper levels of the society. So what we find is that broad ranges of people are now not making as much progress as they had in earlier years. And all of those trends have become intensified in the decades since the 1970s. You can just look at one indicator after another, and you can see that income and wealth have been now going upward rather than downward as far as the distribution is concerned. So the Great Compression has been reversed. The second part of that we can look is at government. In the 1950s and 60s, government was activist and in ways that were benefiting the less well off. You know, think about Social Security, minimum wage laws, various other kinds of programs which were helping to funnel income toward lower levels in the society. The second part of this is also what we have in the way of unions. In the 1950s, about 28% of workers belonged to unions. By 2017, it was 11% belonged to unions. So unions, they had their problems, no question about that, but they did help both for union members and for non-union members to raise wages on the lower levels of the society. So what we see beginning in the 1970s is a reversal of the beneficial trends that had been developed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Lewis Powell, who subsequently became a justice of the Supreme Court, wrote a memo in 1971 for the Chamber of Commerce, the United States Chamber of Commerce. He said, government is now doing things that are not toward the benefit of the free enterprise system. Business must become more active in order to protect itself and to preserve freedom of action for major corporations. And Chamber of Commerce took him up on that. Then we had people like the Koch brothers and others funneling money into right-wing think tanks in order to get the notion that somehow or other everybody will be better off if we funnel money toward the top. So what we have then is an intellectual trend as well as an economic trend that is directing wealth toward the already affluent. We see countervailing power, and that phrase belonged to John Kenneth Galbraith. We see countervailing power weakening from the 1970s on. We see things, you can just trace this in issue after issue. The Supreme Court, for example. If you look at the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Burger, then Chief Justice Rehnquist, and then Chief Justice John Roberts, we see business getting a better and better deal in each of those things, to where now in the Roberts Court, Roberts and Alito, appointed in 2005, have meant a tremendous shift in the direction of business getting what it wanted. We've talked about the decline of right-to-work laws. You can see the Federalist Society, the conservative law groups, picking out people whom they are promoting for Supreme Court appointments. We had Gorsuch already, and now we're faced with Brett Kavanaugh. And if he is confirmed, I'm sure that business will do even better than it has done in the past. This is where we are. In 1995, Rawls wrote a new preface to Political Liberalism. And he laid out in that new preface 5 things he thought we should be doing in the way of public policy. The first one is the public financing of elections to reduce the power of money on politics. And we know what happened with the Citizens United decision that enabled corporations to funnel money into politics even more than it had been before. We're a very long way from anything resembling public financing or even control of private money. Campaign finance laws have been declared unconstitutional. Second point that Rawls wanted was a fair equality of opportunity in training and education. We're even further away from that than we were a generation ago. Think of the enormous debt that people now carry to get through school. I looked up a couple of institutions at which I taught. The New Jersey Institute of Technology, which used to be Newark College of Engineering when I worked there, in-state tuition and fees, $12,000 a year. That doesn't say anything about living expenses. University of Akron, where I spent 30 years, tuition and fees for undergraduates run more than $11,000 a year. The last time I looked, there was something like 12% of University of Akron students that got help from their families. The rest of it had to be somehow or other self-financing. The average undergraduate comes out now with debt somewhere between $26,000 and $30,000. And so people start off their adult lives not with nothing, but with negative $26,000, $28,000.
Are you sure that figure is accommodating current prices? Because some of the people I talk to have 100,000, tuition bills.
I was talking about undergraduates. If you look at people coming out of, but if you people coming out of professional schools, then you may be talking six figures easily. Yeah. There was a law school in California that gave tuition waivers for the first year. The tuition was $30,000 a year. And they said, well, you can maintain the tuition waiver if you maintain a B average. And people who had gone through undergraduate said, oh, B average, that's no sweat. Well, then they found out that they graded on a curve. And so 70% of them could not maintain a B average or whatever it was. So they were on the hook for $60,000 in tuition for the last 2 years, which says nothing about living expenses.
There's also the fact that in law school, a C is considered failing.
Yeah. Well, when you think about this whole question of equality of opportunity, it's not just the top 1% that persists in maintaining lack of access. It's the top 20%. And that includes some of us here, or at least wannabes. If you look at, let's say, legacy admissions. So legacy admissions in selective schools mean there are a certain number of positions that nobody else is even in a position to compete for. If you're a good athlete or play the oboe, maybe you have a leg up as far as access to a selective school. If you look at what's happening in higher education now, flagship state universities have a demographic profile that is not all that much different from selective private schools. So people say, hey, I can't make it to, let's say, Princeton, but maybe I can make it to University of Michigan or Penn State, schools where we, main campus, schools that we would consider the public Ivies. So those profiles are being funneled. And on each level of education, it's becoming more difficult for people below the top 20% to even live in the districts where you have the good high schools. We drive up housing prices in the affluent suburbs which provide good high schools. So the only way you compete is if you can pour in 30-40% of two incomes in order to afford the house that gives you access to that good school. In some New York City, it becomes vicious as to what preschool you get into, to what grade school you get into, and so on, because all of that has an impact on what your chances are. And so, we're a long way from equality of opportunity. And it's become a lot worse because education and medical care, but those two things have become much more expensive relative as percentage of GDP than they were, let's say, in the 1950s, gross domestic product. because they involve hands-on activities by highly specialized and trained people and for whom they can charge top dollar. It's becoming very difficult for people to move up the ladder. We have less upward mobility than most of Western Europe now. We're becoming a more stratified society. Of people who are committed to liberty and equality, and we're making it more difficult to get there. Okay, a third point is a decent distribution of income and wealth. We're not there. And it's more skewed as far as wealth is concerned. The Federal Reserve reported about a year ago that a majority of people, over 50% of people, would either have to sell something or borrow money to meet an unexpected expense of $400. And $400 is what, a car repair these days. So you have people who find themselves pinched because something came up that they hadn't anticipated. They need an extra $500 or $600. They either have to sell something or borrow the money. So that's very, very difficult. The people who have wealth can ride out diminished income because they can tap the emergency fund or tap something and ride it out. The people who can't do that fall victim to the payday loan lenders. The executive director of the Payday Loan Association is Dennis Shaw, who was a former mayor of Akron, and somebody I knew, but he now defends the payday loan, he said, because these are people who are not served by ordinary financial institutions, and the only way they can meet these unexpected expenses is to go to the payday loan lenders. Now, if you say you can't have a payday loan, you get a loan on your car to meet that unexpected expense. And you can find yourself wind up paying over 300% of interest per year. So these are, when you see those things, you begin to feel, oh, there are so many people in trouble when you see those things and the proliferation of those things. Fourth thing that Rawls talked about was society as employer of last resort. He really didn't like the welfare state. The welfare state, to him, transfers of cash in order to keep people afloat. He thought that might be necessary, but it really didn't promote human dignity. So what he wanted was that somehow or other there would be work made available for every able-bodied person so they could be self-supporting and therefore self-respecting. So when Rawls wanted to have either what he called either a democratic socialism, and I'm not quite sure how one would get to a democratic socialism, but anyway, we could do that, or a property-owning democracy. If you could have either of those things, you could have people have the dignity of work and therefore the self-respect of work. I have some ideas on that as to what might be done to promote that. Let me get on my soapbox for a minute. But one of the things I'd like to see done is an infrastructure fund, let's say fueled by estate taxes, let the wealthy pay for this, and you go down a lot lower than where we are now. Now you can shelter $11 million, and that's even if you don't have it all overseas. But that you could have infrastructure projects that would be fair, that would be efficient, and that would be sustainable. And that's something I think that we very badly need as a society. And it's hard to get to because the average congressperson can only think about a year ahead. We have the elections every 2 years, and you've got to start raising the money at least a year before the election. So therefore, you spend most of your time dialing for dollars, and you're not really in a position to think anything long term. The other thing I would like to see, and this goes back to Rawls's fair equality of opportunity, I'd like to see an awful lot more directed to early childhood education. It's pretty obvious that people by the age of 4 have to develop a certain sense of deferred gratification, the famous one marshmallow, two marshmallow experiment. I'll give you one marshmallow. If you can hold off for 15 minutes, I'll give you a second one. The kids who can do that at age 4 are more likely to do well in school and in subsequent careers. If you don't develop a rich vocabulary by being talked to, read to, what have you, also by age 4, you're going to have trouble reading. It may not show up in grade 1 because the tasks are simple enough that you can get by, even with a limited vocabulary. By grade 3 and 4, when you shift from learning to read to learn, if you don't have that vocabulary, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And talking to people who teach in elementary schools, you get the notion that kids come in at very different levels. And some of them are really starting well behind. So those are kinds of things that we could do to promote the idea of work that would be beneficial socially as well as individually. The last thing of this 5 items thing that Rawls talked about was basic health care assured to all citizens. And we're a very long way from that. The tax cuts of 2017 are going to have to be paid for somewhere. It may not show up for 4 or 5 years, but it will show up. And where it might be paid for are things like Medicaid and Social Security. And people will find that they're going to be hurt, and hurt badly, by funneling more money toward the top, which the Tax Act of 2017 did. So, I'm off my soapbox, so you're going to get on yours. Yeah.
You say here basic health care assured to all citizens, and then your next sentence is he's silent on immigration.
Oh, I didn't talk about that.
Was he using citizens, meaning people? I mean, to me, it's basic health care for humans.
Yeah, well, let me just talk about the second aspect of that first, because I didn't talk about the immigration, and I should. Rawls says nothing about immigration in any of his books that I've come across. He assumes that people are born in a particular society and spend their entire lives in that society. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out. That's totally unrealistic for what the United States is now. We now have 14%, at least, of our population being foreign born. That's as high as a percentage as we had back in the Ellis Island era, 1910, 1914. That about 1 out of 7 or a little bit more than that had been born outside the United States. You got to major cities where you might have 50% of the population being either foreign born or having at least one foreign born per parent. We're back to that with the tremendous transformation of immigration. Let me just say a word about this, because this is one of my hobby horses. 1965, we adopted a new law on immigration, and we substituted family reunification for national origins. The national origins quota system, which was in effect between the 1920s and the 1960s, was repressive of immigration as a whole. We limited the number of people coming in, 154,000, something like that. The quotas were skewed toward Northern and Western Europe. The 1965 legislation, which was sponsored by Ted Kennedy, among others, the idea behind that, what people thought they were going to be doing, was allowing people from Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe in order to bring in family relatives. And it did a little bit of that. But eventually what it did was lead to many more people coming from Asia and Latin America, especially Latin America. So if you look at the immigration in recent years, Asian immigrants have gone from about 1.5 million to about 18 million. If you look at Hispanic immigration, Hispanics are now up to about 57 million in the United States. We've had a situation where a state like California is becoming majority minority. The browning of America And this is something that is driving people up the wall in many parts of rural America. So we've become a very different sort of society in that sense. Rawls doesn't talk about that. You know, he factors out immigration. And I've always thought that was a weakness in his theory. You know, he wanted to focus on the original position and how we would act as a society of fair cooperation. But there is now a whole new element that is making it more difficult, because people still think in terms of race and color in the United States in ways that are negative toward those who are not, you know, majority white. So we're suffering. My own sense is that we should be welcoming anybody who is ready to accept the basic notions that we are a society that focuses on freedom and equality. And if you are prepared to follow out those basic ideals, more power to you. But, you know, Rawls didn't work that into his theory. He wanted to think about the possibility of a society that was going to be come in at birth, leave at death. And that's not the way it is. Yeah.
With immigration, everybody's inspected and expected to fit certain standards if they get rid of the lottery. Then anybody coming in you would assume is reasonably healthy, and therefore is not going to be a big expense on basic health insurance for all. Why people hold that up as a big problem, that everybody in Latin America, for heaven's sakes, that's going to die in 5 years is going to come here for care and going to be terribly expensive on our system. Hospitals and that, emergency rooms, that's not true.
Well, Milton Friedman, who's one of the great economic gurus of the libertarian right movement, he said you can't have a welfare state and totally open borders, because if it won't work. So he said, and to some extent that may be true. That if you had unrestricted, no holds barred immigration, that would put strains that would maybe collapse certain systems. So you might want to have you have to have some limitations on this. George Borjas, who's an economist at Harvard, thinks we take too many of the wrong kinds of immigrants, because we take too many unskilled, too many people who are going to be in competition with Americans of a similar class and social background, and that's going to depress the wages of those who are already here. This is a terribly difficult question to deal with empirically. The economists argue about this all the time. Borjas's point is that if you increase the supply of a certain kind of labor by 10%, even if you had 10% more engineers, that's going to reduce the wages of engineers by 3%. If you have an increase in the level of unskilled workers, that's going to depress the wages of unskilled workers. And I have to, kind of intuitively, I suspect that there's a certain truth to that. When everybody was worried about Y2K, remember back in 2000, they thought it would collapse computer systems. They found out they could get engineers from India or various other places for a lot less money than they would have to pay American engineers. There are 65,000 visas, which are now admitted on, I think it's called HB 12, people with particular skills. Businesses fight like crazy for those 65,000 visas. So they get people for whom they don't have to pay as much. So yeah, we have to think about that. What is the impact on immigration on the people who are already here? We have to think about that.
Over here, I'm gonna bring the microphone around Corey so I see you.
One factor that feeds into the impact of immigration on the economy is the fact that in some careers we do not have enough people. For my entire adult life, I was a nurse. I made pretty good money because there were never enough nurses for my entire adult life. And so a thing that immigration regulations need to address is immigration should be for the good of the country in supplying skills that we don't have enough of. When I was working on immigrating to Canada, I found that their standards were quite high. I could have gone, except for economic reasons, but I couldn't have if I weren't a nurse.
Yeah, you know, we really don't take all that high a percentage of the population compared to some other societies. Australia and Canada take in a lot more people relative to their existing populations than we do. They can be quite selective as far as who they take. You know, you have to bring in needed skills or capital or whatever. So yeah, there is a very real sense. The trucking industry is complaining that it's now short 50,000 drivers. And so they're going out to groups that had been underserved or underrepresented, and women, even teenagers and others, to become truck drivers because they're suffering from it. People are finding there aren't enough people in the trades, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, what have you. And so they would want more people of those skills. I happen to think there is a bias in favor of white-collar occupations compared to the trades, that people could make decent livings in the trades. That's fine for other people's children. Mine are going to go to college. So there is a certain class bias built into where we think, you know, our children and our grandchildren should finish. Timothy Egan tells a lovely story in the Times about a classmate of his at the University of Washington who absolutely just aced the engineering curriculum. Thought, well, you know, he wasn't quite where he wanted to be, so he took a year off to read the great Russian novelists. Then he went to work for Boeing for 30 years as an engineer. I know a plumber in Akron, Ohio, has a degree in French. The plumbing was the family business. He went to college, got a degree in French, and he's now a plumber. Did he waste his time? I don't think so.
No, I agree.
You know, because that exposure gave him something that he would not have got any other way. He was lucky enough to be in a situation where his future career was kind of assured, or at least he had the opportunity.
Over here.
Yeah.
At what time, not too long ago, it was possible to go to college and meet the current workplace needs. I became a nurse, and for every year that I worked in a low-income or poverty-stricken area, 10% of my college bill was paid off. We no longer do that. So, and nursing is not an essentially high-paid job, although it is very skilled. No one believes that, but it's true. You know, our government is no longer attempting to meet the society's needs. The lack of common sense seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, this is one of the pervasive complaints. You know, George W. Bush, to his credit, wanted to have a comprehensive immigration legislation. Couldn't get it. You know, the last time we had comprehensive immigration legislation was 1986. Because when you get into the cockpit, that is Congress, when you deal with these issues, the conflicts are tremendous. People want cheap labor. People want to keep out those certain kinds of people. But how do you get both of those things at the same time? I mean, there were so many pressures relating to immigration that it's absolutely impossible, or has been, for 30 or almost 40 years, to get anything sensible done on a very difficult and important subject, because the interests cut in a number of different ways. You know? So, you know, I think about, let's say, go back to the age of countervailing power. A friend of mine who was in the Ohio legislature said, you know, when we get to the position where we can say, we can live with this bill, then you know you've got something. It's not necessarily that everybody's going to get everything they want. Nobody gets everything, and nor should they expect to. But if we can all say, we can live with this and make it work, then we know we have something. And when it comes to comprehensive legislation on immigration, we've not been able to do that for a long time.
Over here.
The first wave of immigration was due to World War II because Europe was devastated, so you had generations of people coming over here to start a new life. The second wave of immigration is due to America, the CIA's foreign policy, over 50 years. Most of the people coming from Honduras, Chile, and all of these other South American countries are coming because any chance of an opportunity of a democratic society has been lost to them because of our foreign policy. So our foreign policy in a lot of ways is directly responsible for our economic condition. In other words, these so-called people coming here to take our jobs is because of our foreign policy. In Venezuela, in Chile, in Honduras especially. Hillary Clinton's responsible in Honduras as far as the so-called soft coup that occurred there.
You know, you're hitting one of my many areas of ignorance. You know, my doctor in Ohio used to say we're all ignorant in just about different things. And so, you know, one of the things that I am ignorant about is, you know, what went on in Central America and who's responsible for what. But I would make one comment about First World War II immigration, and this is an important one. When we think about all of the displaced people of World War II, and there were millions of them, Tony Jutt's book on post-war shows just how bad things were in the first 5 years after World War II. Who were the people who had the easiest time getting into the United States in the late 1940s under displaced persons? Ethnic Germans from Eastern Europe. They were the ones who had the easiest time getting into the United States because they were the most comparable to the already existing American population. You know, when you think about the paper walls that were put up against Jewish migrants in the 1930s, the German quota was never used up during the 1930s under the quota system. German Jews would have liked to have filled up that quota. They had a great deal of difficulty getting visas in the United States because there were particular officials in the State Department who wanted to keep them out, among other things.
Hey, Jim, we actually have a question I want to read to you from online. It says, I know, we're very impressed. She would like to know, how are you educating your grandchildren? And if you have resources you can share with us that you use with your own children and grandchildren.
Wow.
He talks a lot.
Number 3 son. No, number 2 son. Yeah, I guess I do. I try to back up some of it with actions, like writing checks. Well, you know, I do think one of the things that I try to do is set that, you know, it's not an issue. You're going to college. That's not a question. This is an assumption. And if you want to violate that assumption, you're going to be in a hell of a lot of trouble.
What if you want to do a trade?
So, I mean, that's a big part of it. I'm talking about gifts to grandchildren. Okay, each grandchild has received a complete 1-volume Shakespeare, complete with a letter saying the first 3 plays you should read are Love's Labour's Lost, Romeo and Juliet, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. I don't care in quite what order, but read those 3 first. And then after you get those 3 read, I'll give you another 3. Nobody has told me that they've read those 3 yet. But I've also told them that this is a gift for a lifetime. You know? Maybe you won't get it for 10, 15, 20 years. But at some point, I hope that you do get to it. You know, I have lived for the last 15 years on electives that I took in college. That's been that's been what sustained me for the last 15 years.
I just want to add to that. I'm Jim's daughter-in-law, and my son came to me when he was in high school, and he said, you know what, Shane Martell is not going to go to college. He told me he's not going to go to college. Can you do that? And I looked at him and said, not in this family. No. I also want to comment on the fact that both Jim and Marie, his wife, did a lot of support as far as financially getting the grandkids through college.
Oh, okay, saying, you said a lot of people don't have that. No question about that. I mean, the number of people who can comfortably do that is very limited. And that's one of the, really the sad things. I came along at exactly the right time. When I got my degree in 1961, 9 of us finished PhDs at NYU in history that year. We all had academic jobs. Now, if you had 9 PhDs from a given university, you'd be lucky if one had an academic job. Yeah.
When I started junior high school, my grandfather, who was quite an intellectual and was also a member of the Communist Party back in the early stages, sent me the People's History of the United States. And after I read that, it changed my life. That's one of the things. I mean, my grandfather was, you'd say, I'm interested in music, and he'd send you a whole box of books on music. But there is also a children's version of the People's History of the United States.
Oh, Howard Zinn?
With pictures, and it's fantastic. So if anybody wants to give their grandchildren.
We accept donations for our library.
Yeah. Say the name of it again.
The People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn.
By Howard Zinn.
Yeah, Howard Zinn.
I see you, Lou.
I think I can speak loud enough.
No, we're on the beginning.
James, would you consider giving a lecture on those 3 plays by Shakespeare and what you got out of them?
Well, the reason why I told them to start with Love's Labour Lost, it's not much plot, but the language is so exuberant. Shakespeare was about 30 when he wrote that, so he was fully in command of his instrument. It's like you read a great writer. I think of James Thurber. You think of the things that Thurber wrote at 20, 21, 22, they're okay. You look at the things that he wrote at 29 and 30 and you say, oh, this is Thurber. He had got there. And that happened with Shakespeare, I think. By, age 30, he was there. He only had another 22 years after that. But he made tremendous use of them. Yeah, I think, I've just read a book by an economist and a scholar of literature. The scholar of literature said the economist could benefit from reading the great humanist writers, the great narrative writers. And yeah, I think about that. One of the criticisms of John Rawls is that he has a thin conception of the human being. He's taken everything out that makes us what we are. What are we? Maybe we're members of tribes. But I think what Rawls wanted us to do was surmount that sense of tribalism in the honor of becoming human and citizen. When we talk about communitarianism, one of the things that bothers me about that, how do people form communities? By whom we are against. We are this, they are that. We are the good guys, they are people to be watched. So I think one of the notions that a moral philosophy wants to do is to expand the concept of we, of us, to shrink the concept of they and them. And that takes a lot of work. And that takes a certain amount of confidence that somehow or other we can have enough that we share that we don't have to get into, we don't have to circle the wagons in the tribal notions. Yeah.
You talked about possibly changing immigration rules to make sure that people coming in have a set of skills.
That could be, yeah.
Why would you require that your children and grandchildren go to college when what we need are people with more skills?
Okay, good question. I'm a wordsmith. You know, that's my life. I never remember learning how to read. You know, it was something I felt I could always do. You know, am I good with my hands? No. My wife always did. You know, all of the mechanical things around the house. She looked at me and she said, "You don't even know what hand to pick up a tool with." Well, I was left-handed and I was made to write right-handed, and that screwed me up. That's the total explanation of my mechanical ability. But no, I mean, the point is, this is what I'm comfortable with, you know. And was that a good thing to be? Probably not. I hope kids have at least a sufficient amount of mechanical skills to get by, but I never set out to train any one of them in the trades. I didn't set out to find an apprenticeship program for them. The Germans have apprenticeship programs, and they produce quality goods that people will pay premiums for that reason. But that's a weakness. I'll have to admit it. I mean, it's a bias on my part because I was comfortable with words, although I stink in languages other than English. I'm like Spencer Tracy in that movie with Katharine Hepburn when she rattles off some French and such. And what do you speak? A little broken English. Yeah, but I mean, that's where I want to be.
Final question back here.
I think the value of college is that we learn to learn more and to accept more. And it's not something that's limited to college. I don't believe my 2 great-grandchildren will go to college. I hope they will, but I don't believe they will because their parents didn't and their parents are doing fairly well. But what my role in their lives is to help encourage their curiosity and their creativity so that they, even if they don't go to college, will continue to learn and accept new ideas throughout their life. I think it's easier maybe if you go to college, but it's not impossible if you don't go to college. And there are society, if we allowed kids at 16 and 17 and 18 to explore more and to have more out-of-school experiences in different, apprenticeships and in different things, I think we would encourage more acceptance of new ideas, and that's what we need in this world, in this country right now, is acceptance of new things, because so many of 40%, 30% people are so afraid of new things that they can't see any value. They're afraid of people with different colors. They're afraid of people with different religions. They're afraid of people with different views of society. And we need to get people to be open and understanding. And college does a very good job of that, but I think we can do a better job for those who can't or won't go to college.
I think this, though, if I may say something about that. One of the things about reading is it expands your level of experience. So, okay, you have experiences, but then you can enrich those experiences and reflect on those experiences as you read. And I remember saying that once teaching a senior class in high school English, and I could saw one of the kids' eyes light up, because he was obviously a reader, and he was getting that notion that here is a way in which you can enrich your experience and connect it in various ways. I was telling somebody, I've read War and Peace 3 times in my life. And each time I've fallen in love with Natasha Rostov. And any man who doesn't is not necessarily my friend. No, but I mean, there's something about the way in which Tolstoy convinces you that this is an absolutely fascinating person. And that, you get into that. And so here you're seeing this Russian aristocrat of the 19th century who's getting to some very basic human things about how it is we relate to each other and how it is maybe we grow or don't grow as persons. Yeah, there are various ways of doing this, and but I do think that those who have not had the experience of being comfortable with the written, printed word get shortchanged, no matter what else they might have. But that's a bias, I'll have to confess. Some of the best read people I've ever met did not go to college, but they were readers. None of previous members of my family even finished high school. I was not only a first-generation college student, I was a first-generation high school graduate, but they were readers. And so I grew up in a literate environment, and that is something I think is precious. And I think we shortchange our children if we don't expose them to that kind of environment. And there may be other things they need to be able to expose to too. But that's another story, yes.
Yeah, but now everything is turning to digital. There's no paper left.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, what you can do, you can absorb and get to information through the computer, but you still have to read it when you get there.
Yes.
Okay. No, I remembered an article with the title "The Enduring Significance of John Rawls." So I think, oh boy, I remember that title. Let me look at that. Type in that. There's an article by Martha Nussbaum, a woman philosopher at the University of Chicago, printed it out, was able to read it. But the point was I had digital access, but I still had to read it at the other end. So no matter which way you get it, you still wind up with somebody speaking to you on paper, and then you respond on paper. And one of the things I like about that is you're halfway through something, and you look up at the ceiling and you say, does this make sense? This is one of the things I object to when people showing films or various stuff. If you can't stop it and think about it for a little bit, you just rush by. I mean, how many things that we come into where the people don't want us to think? They don't give us time to think. They just keep hitting us with images, so we go from one to one from the other, and at the end of it we say, nonsense. But, it's too late. We've already spent all the time dealing with it.
I have a comment.
Okay, final comment, and then we have
a comment.
Right.
Okay, you're talking about the kind of university and college that some of it is in the past. It's very different. The canon is not what it used to be. The First Amendment that was so strident in Berkeley, now they're marching to not have people with other opinions, blocking people with opinions. It's not the free-thinking places that you and I are thinking of with the great books by Adler. It has changed. We're dinosaurs.
I went to a Catholic college where philosophy was the rational support of theology. This is giving you the arguments that you can take to the guy on the next bar stool who is denying the realities or the virtues of Catholicism. I mean, it was a very different sort of environment. Rawls went through comprehensive environments, comprehensive accounts at age 24. It took me to age 54. But, that's...
But there are schools that don't even want to teach Shakespeare.
Well, I think what's happened... I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
Okay,
we've all come to the position that we read what we're comfortable with.
All right, it's time. We have to, I know we could be doing this all afternoon. So first, let's all thank Jim. This was fantastic. And Jim's going to be able to be here for a little while.
Oh,
right?
yeah, I'll be here.
So you please come up and continue the conversation here. Unfortunately, he has plans, so he can't join you for lunch, but he will stay here for a little while. So thank you again. This was wonderful. And Chris, do you need? Okay.
Oh, I better keep this.
We got one more thing for you, so don't go away. But while we're getting that thing, Anita, come on up. If you do want to sign up for the Child Crisis Centers, please come see me up front. I'll be up front real quick here. And then once we do the thing with the speaker, I'd like to have you help us clean up a little bit. Ron, you still here?
Yes.
If you want to help out with the
What
inmate
Rawls
program,
said,
please do go
if
see
you
Ron
don't
Russell in the
read
back.
the best statement of
Sorry,
what
I'm
we
stalling for
agree
time.
with, We're cheating ourselves.
If I could just have your attention for 1 minute, please. Anybody who still wants to volunteer for the Blind Spaghetti Monster Dinner and has not signed the sign-in sheet, come and get it. Okay? Anybody who has not signed.
Pastafarian singers in the library.
Okay, well, you know what, I did forget one very important thing, and I apologize. I've lost Jim, so.
One last thing. One last thing, everybody. One last thing.
So you know, we do have a tradition of mugging the
Yes,
speakers.
I
You
know.
probably have a
On the
full
11th.
collection, but
Oh,
I want to make
okay.
sure to mug you and thank you again. All right, come on up and talk to Jim.
Awesome, next one. Next one.